I could tell as soon as Danny showed her in that this dame was trouble. No, not that she was trouble, but that she was bringing me a world of trouble that wasn't of her doing, just a feeling I had as I looked up and saw her in the door. "Hello, Mr. Carter," she asked nervously. I could tell she was married, as most of my clients were. "Nick Carter, ma'am," I nodded. "No, not like the punk kid singer, but I sometimes get mail for him, one of the hazards of being a PI with a famous name that lives in LA. My dad actually named me after a secret agent in a set of dime store spy novels by Joe Publishing. We had the last name already, but my dad just named me Nick, not Nicholas. Go figure." I rose as I spoke and shook her hand. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" "Your assistant said that you could help me." "I was referred by one of your previous clients." She smiled a bit more, still nervous though. "I see. Okay, Mrs. I'm Janine Linder. My husband is Dennis Linder, and he's a psychologist. I have reason to believe he's cheating on me, and I want proof before I file for divorce," she said, handing me a picture of him. I raised my eyebrow as I regarded the picture. He looked to be about 40, with a square jaw and dark hair going gray at the temples. He had bright green eyes that would probably tempt most women. "Okay, ma'am, you know how this works?" I asked, and she nodded. "Good. Give me 2 weeks tops, and I'll have the evidence you need. For those 2 weeks, I charge $5,000. Is that acceptable to you?" "Yes, and half up front, correct?" she asked. "Do you have your own account that your husband doesn't know of or have access to in order to check your finances?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I set it up a couple of months ago so he wouldn't know if I hired someone to track him. Your former client says that you are the best." She smiled, then handed me a cashier's check for $2,500. "Thank you, ma'am. Give me an idea of how he's been acting suspicious if you would. The more information I get now, the easier it will be to track his movements." "Well, it's a bit strange that I even caught on that he was cheating. He spends every night with me and the weekends too, but sometimes when I call his office for a lunch date, his phone is turned off," she said. "Well, he could have a client run over during a session," I shrugged. "Normally you would be right, but then there's the distance at home. He used to be all over me, but now he hardly touches me." Then I noticed the perfume smell on his clothes. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it wasn't my brand of perfume, she said. Some of his clients could have hugged him. "And how old is he?" I asked. "He's 44, she said, and I nodded. "Well, I heard that men that age have lower sex drives than they did before hitting 40. Could that be the reason for his distance emotionally?" "You sound like you think it's just me being stupid," she said angrily. "No, ma'am, I'm just trying to figure out why you would think he's cheating. I admit the perfume is a pretty heavy indicator, but it could just be circumstantial. I'm going to take this case, but I also need to know everything you can think of. How is he acting suspicious besides turning his phone off?" "Well, it's always just before lunch on Mondays and Wednesdays. Other times he answers right away, but on those days, it goes straight to his voicemail." "Okay, I think I get the picture. Tomorrow is Wednesday, so I'll start my investigation then. I will be in touch as soon as I have anything concrete for you." I nodded and rose from my chair as she did and shook her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I hope it's nothing, to be honest, but I need peace of mind on this," she smiled warmly. She really was a knockout, and if I hadn't been married, I would maybe consider consoling her. "Anytime, Mrs. Linder. If I don't find anything at the end of 2 weeks, you will not have to pay me the remainder of my fee. It's my guarantee." "Thank you again, Mr. Carter," she said. "Ma'am, call me Nick." Mr. Carter was my dad. I smiled, and she smiled back. "Okay, Nick. I'm Janine." "Ma'am is too formal." "Okay, Janine. I'll be in touch as soon as I have anything for you. Danny, my assistant, should have your information, so I'll get your number from her." I showed her out and promised again to be in touch. As soon as Janine had left, Danny came in and plopped down on the overstuffed chair in front of my desk. Daniela Velasquez has been my assistant for 6 years. I would honestly be lost without her, and I think she knows it. She's single, dates some but not often, and has the most gorgeous jet black hair, doe brown eyes, and a great tan that comes from her Mexican heritage. She's built like J-Lo but with more junk in the trunk and way more of a rack. Yeah, if I wasn't married to the woman of my dreams, Danny would be in trouble. I might be married, but I'm not dead, and I never touch, well, except for hawks. Okay, Chief, this is what I got for you right now. She handed me the file she put together online about our target. Danny is a pretty good PI in her own right, and I was proud to be the one who taught her. She's a quick study, that's for sure. Dennis Linder, psychologist extraordinaire. I looked at the file, and a warning bell went off in my head. It seemed that a former patient had filed a malpractice claim against him a couple of years back, but the claim had been dropped mysteriously with some stock cliché answer given as to why. This was getting more and more interesting. The former patient was female, and her husband had divorced her soon after the malpractice claim had been dropped. That was the warning bell. I had a bad feeling about Dr. Dennis Linder, and my gut is usually right. Danny, dig a bit deeper on this prick, will you? I got a bad feeling about him, I said, and Danny giggled at my phraseology. Ah, yeah, I know I opened the door for that one. And thanks for not stepping through it. Anytime, boss man. She winked at me prettily, then stepped back out to her desk to do some more Bing searches on Dr. Linder. Daniela is worth twice her weight in gold, and I know that I don't pay her enough, even though I pay her very well. We're more partners than boss and assistant. We split each case takes 60/40ths, including retainer fees. Those retainer fees, when added up between multiple clients, equal over $200,000 a year after expenses. I usually clear $150,000, and Danny clears $110,000 easily, and that's after taxes. We share a lawyer who gives us legal help quid pro quo since we kind of work for him too. Wesley Quinton is his name, and divorce disputes and other domestic issues are his game. Then there's my wife, Samantha. Yes, Samantha Carter, formerly Samantha Stern, so no relation to Colonel Carter on Stargate SG-1. She goes by Sammy for short. I met Sammy 7 years ago when I had quit the company I was working for in Langley, Virginia, and moved back to LA. I was an insurance investigator for that company. It was a decent living, but after a client in Paris turned out to be a real prick, I decided I'd had enough and put my investigative skills to good use back home. I had enough saved up to start my own PI business there. Now nothing can be redacted. Sammy is a complete knockout, tall at 5 feet 8 inches, which puts her even with me in height when she wears her 4-inch heels, fiery red hair, sparkling blue eyes, 34C-24-36 measurements, and legs that go all the way up to heaven. Her Angelina Jolie lips and sexy smile can melt the hearts and raise the erections of any man within 50 feet, and she has it all packed in the right places. I first met Sammy back when I had solved my first case for my first client. He threw a bash to celebrate me finding and returning his property. I was his guest of honor, and Sammy was the daughter of one of his friends. She saw me, and I saw her, and it was as if the magnetic force of the earth drew us together. We talked and danced and talked some more. I met her father, who was a good man, and he bought my usual line about being a former insurance investigator that decided to go into the private sector as a PI. I had prospects, and during the shindig, I managed to score some more clients. That was 7 years ago, and after dating for 6 months and living together for 6 months, we were married in a small ceremony with just her family and a few of our friends. My parents had died a few years back in a car wreck when I was out of the country and had left me their house in their will. I spent 3 years in the Army as an MI interrogator, then got recruited by the aforementioned company to investigate possible insurance fraud. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, I became a damn good investigator and realized I could make some damn good money at it as a PI, so I bid the company adieu and headed back home to LA. Getting a concealed carry license was like pulling teeth, but it was worth it to carry my dad's old Colt M1911A1 pistol. The big .45 ACP ammo pretty much guaranteed a kill if fired with accuracy. That was one thing I've always been good at, shooting. So, I went out to where Danny was picking out bits and pieces of Dennis Linder's life and printing them out for me. Hey, Danny, go ahead and knock off for the day when you're done with the searches. I'm heading home. I smiled at her. No problem, Chief, she smiled back at me with more than professional respect. You know, I hope Sammy knows what she's got at home. I think she does, sweetie. You know you're going to make some guy really happy someday if you ever settle down. I winked at her, flirting a bit. Not likely. I missed my chance by a few months, she shrugged. I opened my mouth to ask her about that, but she had already turned back to her computer monitor. Okay, so go ahead and get the info, folder it, and I'll be in first thing to pick it up. Good night, I said as I headed towards the door. Good night, boss man, she called out as I left the office. I got in my car and headed home. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking about Sammy and how she'd been acting lately. Over the past couple of months, she'd been kind of distant, as if she had something on her mind and wanted to tell me, but it always seemed as if something was holding her back. I resolved that when I got home, I was going to ask her about it until she told me. I would be an idiot to not see the writing on the wall. I'd seen it enough over the years. The story was always the same. The wife or husband was always emotionally distant either just before or just after starting an affair. Thus far, she kept telling me nothing whenever I asked her what was wrong or if she wanted to talk to me about something. Why women do the whole nothing routine, I'll never know.